Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode here at Amazic.com, where we talk to industry leaders and influencers from around the world, but all of them focused on just one thing: Kubernetes and cloud native. And so that's exclusively what we focus on. If you like what you hear in this interview, definitely head over to Amazic.com. We've got a whole bunch of other interviews just like this. We've also got articles, we've got event coverage, job listings, a whole bunch of stuff. So definitely head over there to get your dose of what's happening in the space. I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Amazic.com. With us today, we have Leonid Belkind. He is the co-founder and CTO of Torq. That's TORQ. Their website is torq.io, if I'm right. Leonid, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Twain. Wouldn't miss it for the world.
Yeah, I want to just get us started with just getting to know a little bit about you and your career so far up to Torq. Just what you've been up to before Torq. That'll be a great starting point for us.
Absolutely. I'd say the headline would be a software engineer turned into cybersecurity strategist. So, I started my career as a software engineer, second part of the 90s, way before Kubernetes and cloud native architectures became
way back.
way back. But actually it gives a good perspective to truly appreciate the strength that orchestrated, horizontally scalable backend solutions can deliver. So, I was born professionally in an era where we were building B2B enterprise security products with, it's monolithic backends using traditional C++, then naturally moved with the industry to developing stuff using Java enterprise architecture, began using cloud native architecture and particularly Kubernetes in a previous company that I have co-founded. So for many years, I worked for a very large cybersecurity vendor, Check Point Software Technologies. Somewhere around 2016, I established my first company. It was called Luminate Security. We were innovators in zero trust network access. And this is where I got a chance to build my first true cloud native architecture. We actually started when Kubernetes wasn't still generally acceptable as production grade. So we started with the Docker orchestrator and migrated to the first pure Kubernetes deployment. My current company, Torq, after the previous one was successfully acquired after a few years, Torq is an automation and orchestration for security and operation teams. And here we are actually built on Kubernetes, not only as our backend architecture, but actually as the very orchestrator for the pipelines of the events that we are performing.
Okay. Really interesting. Yeah, we're going to get into all the details about Torq. Before that, I want to just ask a follow-up question to that, which is
Sure.
How did the switch from software developer to security engineer happen? Was there a particular point, or was it a gradual progression?
First of all, I believe it was a gradual progression, but I have to tell you that I attribute the actual shift to one explicit conversation that I had around 14 years ago. At the time, I was a project manager and head of a large cybersecurity management platform, working for, back then, the world's largest vendor, Check Point Software Technologies. And I was approached by one of our resellers in the United States who were looking to create an event and create a dialogue between the main users, few of them coming from Fortune 10 companies, etc. And it turned out that me being sort of like the head of research and development for that project, I was the most suitable person to moderate this discussion, to architect this discussion, etc. And these 2 or 3 days, it was like a workshop event, actually taught me that my true passions are not necessarily only on the engineering side, but on this line connecting the real worlds, the problems that people are trying to solve, their expectations, mis-expectations, right, etc. So I think this singular event has put me on a track where I am many years after today, where I am the person on this connective tissue between the technology and the problem of the sort of like domain of the actual problem we're solving for someone.
Really interesting. Wow, came out of an event and a conversation,
Sometimes all you need is a small push in the right direction.
Yeah, amazing. And it's nice that we're getting back to events and conversations after the lockdown and stuff. So that's great.
Amazing.
I want to start with getting into our topic of Kubernetes security with just a very open-ended question of, when you look at Kubernetes security today, what do you see as the most significant challenge or need in the space?
So, I envision, and it also comes from my experience as a consumer. We run a pretty significant Kubernetes environment, and in my experience as a security vendor, talking to others who do that. So, in general, rolling out business applications on Kubernetes epitomizes this shift left approach, right? Completely breaks paradigms with the traditional IT and IT operations, et cetera, et cetera. So naturally, security of these environments happens on two planes, in the pipeline and in the runtime, and both are equally important. The interesting piece is that with any modern security today, unfortunately, there is a gap. Security professionals are responsible for defining security policies, detecting various security events, but unlike 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they don't possess the ability to actually go ahead and autonomously resolve it. They need to get back to the DevOps owners, site reliability engineers, sometimes business application component owners, and collaborate with them in order to resolve any open issue. And I think that the most significant need today is actually for easy, streamlined, scalable, observable collaboration here. I think that we are at an inflection point where we have a lot of technologies that can identify the issues, but sort of like drop the case immediately after identifying, leaving the security owners in charge of, okay, let's do something about it.
Interesting. I see that, you take a very practical approach to security where, it's all about, it seems like, you're very focused on the resolution itself. And I'm sure we're going to get into.
Nobody wants to know how insecure they are. Everybody wants to ensure that they are secure.
Absolutely. I like how you put that. And just I want to find out about, as you speak to different people, your customer organizations, different partners, vendors. What are some of the anti-patterns you see in organizations that use Kubernetes when it comes to security?
Actually, believe it or not, but you sort of like touched it yourself. The most common anti-pattern that actually used to be an anti-pattern for other areas in security as well, but is much more grave with cloud native one is, let's start with detection. Okay, Twain, we understand remediation is difficult, so let's start with detection, right? And it is an anti-pattern because it provides people with a false sense of security. What do you mean? I'm overseeing my infrastructure. I can detect anything that happens, which is perfect. But remember, we don't really want to just detect. The moment, the fraction of a second we detect, it immediately becomes a race against time to analyze, remediate. And what if we detect not just a single issue, which is quite often the case, but actually multiple issues? And if we do not have the talent pool, the personnel to go ahead and tackle them all in parallel? Wait a second, how do we even prioritize? What are we solving first? What are we solving next? This is the biggest challenge, right? The super focus on detect and the complete deficiency in, okay, what happens once we detect it? Because eventually we want to resolve.
Yeah. It's all about, that MTTR, as they say,
Absolutely.
mean time to resolution.
Absolutely.
And, so it comes down to really cutting short the time between, awareness to response to remediation, really cutting those gaps down.
Absolutely.
So security needs to be fast, is what I hear you saying. You have no time to waste.
Fast and well defined. It's not a time to be freestyling. Let's put it like this.
Yeah. Could you give us some examples of how security can be fast, compared to previous ways of doing security?
Let's take a look at two very similar, albeit very different events. Let's get back to December last year, where a critical vulnerability in a Log4j library, Log4Shell, was discovered. Immediately, discovery tools, both traditional vulnerability scanners and more modern tools, were adjusted, right, to detect this very problem. But what happened then actually has thrown the whole world into turmoil. I'm familiar with people who worked nights and weekend shifts, people who delayed their holiday plans, etc. Why? Because, sure, detection is a part of it. You got 100, maybe 1,000 of resources that theoretically could contain the vulnerability. And now you have the humongous task of realizing who is the owner, how to analyze whether it is exploitable or not. What are the resolution ways to actually go ahead and secure yourself while not harming your operation, etc. So Log4j is a vulnerability. Detecting it, having the tools to identify the vulnerability, while the challenge of itself was actually not that big of a deal, took organizations weeks, some even months, to actually get a clean plate. Let's take a look at what happened just a couple of months ago, when a happily not as critical, but nobody knew it when it was announced, a vulnerability was pre-announced by the OpenSSL team. Remember, it happened a couple of months ago, right? They said, next week, we will announce a critical vulnerability in these and those versions. Same organizations, based on their lessons learned from the Log4Shell ordeal last year, were ready with the processes. They have pre-scanned all the environments, that have pre-identified all the potentially vulnerable assets. The moment the details of the vulnerability landed, a whole machine was ready to crunch it, figure out who they're going to, what is going to be the process, which resources are going to be exempted, etc., etc., etc. Right? That particular vulnerability ended up being not so scary. But then again, this being prepared, being ready to turn on the machine when a major incident happens, which indeed shortened the time for resolution. I think that's the best example of what we learned as an industry in just the past year.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. That was a huge attack, and just exactly a year after SolarWinds. And so, they just they don't stop. They just keep coming, I guess. And so,
Will never stop, probably. And in fact, as the world becomes more and more digital, attacking such infrastructure becomes more and more lucrative, interesting, potentially bearing financial benefits to the malicious sectors, etc. So it will never stop. In fact, it will only intensify.
Yeah, I want to touch on what you just spoke about a little while before this, which is, securing the supply chain and the runtime. Yep. Could you give us a sort of breakdown of how you see, the stack, the Kubernetes stack from code to production, the different parts, and how do you secure each of those parts? If you could dig in a little bit more to what you said earlier.
Absolutely. So I think let's try, for the sake of the discussion, to split it into three, right? First of all, Kubernetes environment itself, it runs on some sort of infrastructure. Could be a private cloud infrastructure like VMware Tanzu, or public cloud infrastructure like GKE and the Google Cloud, EKS and Amazon, etc., etc. So there is a question of what it means to secure that under the Kubernetes infrastructure level. Then, of course, we are beginning to talk about the Kubernetes environment itself, right? The ingress controller, east-west traffic, hardening of potential communications between various microservices using service mesh, etc., etc. And then we move one layer deeper and we say, okay, what happens with the workload itself? What does it mean to secure it, in the pipeline, to ensure that no known vulnerable code, stale, etc., even gets to production, to ensure that the configuration of this workloads is hardened and is not open to various ways of exploitation and so on, right? So this underlying infrastructure, Kubernetes virtualized infrastructure, including the overlay network, etc., and workloads themselves. Now, here's an interesting piece. People always ask me, okay, could I do it all in the pipeline? And then, once I validated that only what is coming through my very secure pipeline got green lights on all the checks that I have in the pipeline, gets into production, and am I safe then? And let's say that my production is immutable, etc. And the answer is no. And the reason for that answer, I think it's the easiest to explain on the innermost components, and that's the workloads. Vulnerabilities gets discovered, right? In many cases, when a vulnerability, be it critical or medium, gets published, it already is on code that runs somewhere in production, right? So the fact that something has passed a very secure, some workload has passed a very secure pipeline checks yesterday does not mean that the new information could not have come to light today that actually makes it insecure and exploitable. And that is why for all three of these components, forever there will be a combination of in the pipeline security versus runtime. Well, let's ask the opposite question. Hey, if that's the case, can we rely only on runtime? And the answer is you could, but it wouldn't be very efficient because there are many things that you do know already in the pipeline that you should not be doing, right? Why should I scan my production for network misconfigurations if I'm working infrastructure as code 100%? And these particular types of vulnerabilities, I can actually detect there. And that's why I'm saying that these two will forever be holding hands, pipeline and production.
Yeah, so it seems like, I think this sets the stage for us to talk about Torq and, Torq's approach to security. It seems like what you're saying is, you can't have just one and ignore the other. Both, pipeline and runtime security matter. So Torq's approach is, I'm assuming it's going to be, blending both. If you could give us, the lowdown on Torq's approach to security to get us started, that would be great.
Absolutely. I think as you've seen so far by examples I've provided, Torq's focus on organizational security processes is on orchestrating and automating resolution of security findings. We are not a detection system. Yes, you could use automation, scheduled periodic processes to detect things, but this is not the main thing. Now, here's an interesting observation. So as I mentioned, with the shift left approach, that's democratized a lot of responsibilities that were previously on the IT table back to developers, DevOps, etc. The responsibility for securing things that were also on IT security table shifted left with it. But no matter where, whether it is in the pipeline or already in the runtime, you find a certain issue, the remediation becomes a very orchestrated process. Finding the owner, finding the stakeholders, communicating this, prioritizing properly, enriching so that they have all the context and do not waste their time on bringing the context manually. Potentially, preparing pre-canned mitigation, remediation, containment strategies so that when things come in production, they just choose, okay, have to roll this thing back. Have to take this component aside, deploy another clean version, and this one will undergo digital forensics to understand what happens. Let's isolate this user session. Let's isolate this data segment, etc., right? These eventually serve as repetitive, let's say, building blocks when you go ahead and remediate things in production. And one of Torq's philosophies is to be ready for the actual battle when things are happening. You need to drill these things. Therefore, we firmly believe that, of course, you need to build clear follow-up and orchestration pipeline for every finding. You'd better build pre-canned mitigation, remediation, containment modules that will be used as a part of this pipeline, etc. Right? At the end of the day, we are applying the same principles to Kubernetes and cloud-native security as National Institute of Standards, NIST, has defined in its standard for incident handling: preparation, enrichment and identification, containment, analysis, remediation, returning back to production, right? These principles have been defined many, many years ago, and they are absolutely theoretical and could be applied to any problem. The trick, or let's say the challenge, particularly with cloud native environments, is their velocity, right? The speed with which things are rolling to production, incremental updates, continuous deployment, etc. And, it should be matched by the speed with which you continuously analyze and resolve problems. It is almost as if you extend the well-known continuous development, integration, deployment, analysis cycle to identifying security issues, assigning, orchestrating, deploying the remediation, right? It becomes the extension of your development cycle.
All right. Really interesting. It kind of sounds like what you're describing is incident management for security. I don't know if that's accurate.
Democratized, continuous, orchestrated incident management for cloud native environments. Absolutely, that's what it is. The old school incident management, remember, it was quite a heavy process with role players, involvement, the MTTR that you mentioned, mean time to resolve, could be, depending on the priority, anywhere between days to hours, whereas in here, we should be talking about minutes and maybe even seconds.
Really interesting. Wow. You're also talking about how monitoring is already done, by others, and it seems like that's not the focus of TORC as much. So how does TORC integrate with monitoring tools? Because obviously monitoring data informs security decisions. How does that part work?
Absolutely. So the basic fundamental thesis we had in order to build a solution that allows organizations to orchestrate security events is that we need to be 100% open to any monitoring tool. It could be an in-house script that you launch. It could be tools open source or provided by your infrastructure as a service provider. It could be commercial products. One of the interesting pieces when you compare TORC as a eventually automation and orchestration platform to previous generations of products that aimed at solving similar problems is that back then, like 10 years ago, you would have asked me, okay, how many integrations you would have? And I'd say, well, 50, 100. And you would go and say, oh, and your competitor has 150. So probably they're more applicable.
Yeah.
Today, it's, I'm not even naming a finite number. We have what we call them integration templates that you can reuse. But the moment you want to connect it to a homegrown tool, some sort of new innovative solution that we've never met, you don't need to be blocked even a single second in order to do that. So being an open platform that can connect anywhere, quickly consume any data structure that describes the event finding alerts at the core. Without that, I don't think that an investment in an automation platform is very much worthwhile. So we focused a lot on that.
That's great. Yeah, good to hear. And, going back to what you're talking about, how TORC helps teams, get security stuff done is what you're trying to say. I want to ask about, how different teams use TORC. What's the experience like for a developer versus a SecOps versus an ops person as they use TORC? What's that like?
So the interesting piece is that each of these roles needs to have a slightly different experience. I mean, all of them care about a common communication bus. All of them care about being able to capture the event, being able to enrich the data, being able to translate it into their favorite collaboration tools, Slack, Microsoft Teams, etc., into their favorite ticketing tools, Jira's, Zendesk's, into their configuration management, GitHub, GitLabs, Bitbuckets, etc. These are the sort of like common building blocks. But there is a huge difference between pure security specialists that are 100% focused on, say, application security, but are not necessarily software or automation developers. So the focus there is, how do we take these people and allow them maximum ease of expressing? Hey, they know what to do if a certain event happens. How can they express it in a production-grade, scalable logic? When it comes to DevSecOps, these people are the ultimate connective tissue because these people have security expertise on one end. On another end, they also have dev capabilities. So for these people, it is not as much about how do we even enable them to develop, but actually how do we make this efficient? How do we make them go to market, increase their velocity, provide them all the framework where they don't need to care about observability, controllability, scalability, resilience of their automations, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, there are developers that are brought in thanks to this shift of paradigm. And for them, again, developers, they know how to develop, but now comes the other sort of like side. They don't necessarily know how to interact with production systems, how to introduce security blocks, right? So in here, it's the ability to allow them talk using any programming language they want. That's not an issue. We can integrate a block using any programming or scripting language, but the primitives, the access to the data, the ability to communicate with the previous two groups on a common bus. So as you can see, same platform with same capabilities solves a different problem, if you will, for a different group in order to really allow this security shift left and democratization. That's the focus that we have.
All right, neat. You mentioned blocks. I wonder if that's something that you were referring to. I mean, I visited the website and it seems like, Torq is a very visual product. You have kind of drag and drop flows. I don't know if those particular ones are called blocks. But yeah, I just want to ask a little bit about that, really interesting product from the looks of it. How did you decide to take a visual approach with Torq? Because it's very, very rare for a security product to be visually appealing as well.
So, the visual side is kind of like the tip of the iceberg. When we started building Torq, we actually started building it from the core engine. And we first built a horizontally scalable orchestrator of pipelines. Yes, these are not build pipelines, neither test pipelines. These are security event orchestration pipelines or ops event orchestration pipelines. But we started by that. And that engine, that's what actually serves right now up to 1 million of automations every day for Torq customers. This is the scale we are dealing with today. At a peak, I have to tell you, there is daily variance. We are already crossing 2 million. And, it's just the beginning. But that element, of course, is controlled by code. And we offer, for engineers that would like to interact with that, full as code ability to bring their business logic into this orchestration. As I mentioned before, using any programming or scripting language. In fact, you can containerize already existing tools, just bring them as a containerized job, and they are a first-class citizen in our event pipeline. Of course, full control over these pipelines is given using REST or gRPC API. However, that created a product that would be only accessible to the developers. We made, on top of it, a low-code orchestration layer. We use the annotation reserved for Kubernetes custom resources, and we co-created, let's put it like this, a domain-specific language for Kubernetes custom resources that are orchestrated pipelines. You define on top of the resource what is the trigger and under what conditions this pipeline should run, and then you define various conditions, steps, referring to the building blocks built as code. This thing is also fully available for use today. In fact, it enables what we call a operations as code paradigm, right? You can store all of your operational processes like that in GitHub repos, template them, modularize them, apply them to various environments with various conditions, and so on. This enabled access to the platform to additional set of roles, particularly DevOps and DevSecOps people, but still for security subject matter experts, the bridging thing is that visual layer. Now, all these three layers, the visual no code, intermediate low code, and the actual OS code are 100% bidirectionally interchangeable. The same process diagram, if you will, that you build on the no-code level, you can then go ahead and fully modify it, templatize it, etc., on the low-code or control on the S-code level, etc. Right? It's this full duality that is actually very unique, right? No-code tools have proliferated all kinds of aspects of an industry, from sales automation, HR automation, marketing automation, and so on. None of them has to serve that wide an audience, and therefore they usually end up choosing either being no-code or being low-code. And we truly felt that in order to resolve the security issue on a grander scale, you have to be all three. So the visual side indeed was targeted for not only building, by the way, but also troubleshooting, debugging, for lack of a better term, of these automated pipelines. But it is fully reliant, and even our organizational structure actually completely resembles this architecture that I described: the as-code engine, the low-code management, and the completely no-code visual layer on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Wow, really fascinating. Sounds very ambitious that, you set out to solve for such a wide user group, different user groups. And it's fascinating that you also mentioned, interoperability between the different layers. That's really fascinating, how you've accomplished that. But yeah, definitely, low code is traditionally known to be restrictive, but I see that, with Torque, as you've stressed on multiple times,
Endless extensibility.
Yeah, there's extensibility and openness. So, just to confirm, Torque is interoperable with any Kubernetes ecosystem tool, any CNCF tool, for example. Those are the ones that I use the most.
These are built in, absolutely, fully interoperable with anything that is underlining to that. Anywhere between Amazon, OpenStack, Azure, Google, et cetera, as well as, many of our customers are, traditional enterprises. And while they fully go ahead and adopt modern cloud-native architectures, they also have certain estates in more traditional architectures. And while these require more customization, more specific approach, but with the fact that, as I said, any containerized job is a first-class citizen in the pipelines, sure, you can definitely orchestrate these previous generations of architecture as well, and have a single common security operations platform for all generations of your, under constant transition business apps.
Wow, that's really fascinating. So what are some of the results that your customers are seeing, especially, the immediate results as they start using Torque? Could you share some of those examples?
Absolutely. One of the things that we are aiming at is to deliver first return on investment within hours of usage. We are absolutely obsessed. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a better or more politically correct term, with the fact that you should wait as little as possible to see value. Usually, when proof of value is being run, we like to finish a Zoom session, just like the one we are having today, with a first initial end-to-end orchestrated pipeline working for the customer, right? It is a very eye-opening, if you will, experience that you can, and I'm talking here about enterprise environments, adopt something and start seeing ROI very, very quickly. Second important point is, we started having this feedback from our customers, different technologies in your stack actually have a valid ROI. The trick is, how do you quantify it? How do you make it tangible? And one of the things that we baked into the platform from the get-go is the ability for people who use it, mark a process with, okay, this is an application security issue resolution. This is an application reliability issue resolution. Running this thing on the average would save me 3 minutes, or maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Once you invest 10 seconds as an overhead whenever you're declaring, okay, this process is good to go, in providing this metadata, this suddenly allows us to collect for you insights on what's return on investment on your work, which aspects of your security program you have invested in making more efficient. And this thing, let's not forget what economical climate or year we are in, right? 2023 approaches. The economical climate is uncertain, should we put it at best. Yeah, that would be a more appropriate rather than just uncertain. And therefore, everyone is very busy with efficiency. And the question of, wait a second, can I actually improve my security posture while improving efficiency, while reducing my costs? And the answer is yes, by fundamentally approaching your security operations as a well-prepared and well-defined discipline. And this is an important piece. So, like I said, quick ROI and tangible ROI are two basic principles. Third one that I'll mention is something that we could not have planned for, but what we saw and what we hear, where our customer success managers actually talk to the users and sometimes to the sponsors managing the users, this thing drives a cultural shift of a sort. You know, if you come to think of the word engineer, what does the word engineer mean? It comes naturally from the word engine. Engines do work for us instead of us having to, I don't know, carry this weight or somewhere manual. What this enablement on the low-code, no-code, S-code layer allows is it shifts the mindset of people into handling security events as an engineering problem. Let's engineer a pipeline that would go ahead and handle it. By the way, the same way as, for example, continuous integration and continuous delivery used to be manual task. Like when I started being a developer, we had a team of integrators. What they did, well, what the CI is doing pretty much right now. And then we had another team of people who would actually take the asset prepared by the integrators, go ahead, schedule the downtime, deploy it, test it, et cetera, right? So very similar effect. I think these three, right, the short-term immediate impact and the longer-term mind shift that actually allows you to think more and more, and we see this effect as organizations build more and more things. These are the results that we are most proud of, that we are constantly working on optimizing and getting better at.
Yeah, I think you really put that well, you know, different aspects of it. You also mentioned within a Zoom call, you want to get a pipeline done. That's interesting.
Absolutely.
So does that mean you actually provide onboarding support as well for your customers? Or is it just set it, tweak a few things and you're good to go? It's not like that.
We have to provide shelfware. You know what? We are on the stage not to have the product collect dust. So we have a combination of A, continuously updated in products ramping up and support. B, indeed, proactive customer success ramp up. With every enterprise subscription to our service comes an adequate training and repetitive work on ensuring that the teams that are working with the product can actually extract value. And we also have a built-in growing, we call it academy, something that keeps on constantly releasing online interactive tutorials, getting feedback from our current users. We firmly believe that, you know, you said it yourself, it's an ambitious task. And we, as a provider of this infrastructure, we don't necessarily have all the greatest ideas, although I'm very excited and very fortunate to work with some of the people who really do have wonderful ideas. Still, solving it as a community, solving this difficult problem and pushing our industry to think about it as more of an engineering challenge together. This, I think, is a very important guiding element. So all of our learning and onboarding support is constantly supported by what are the challenges, what are the use cases, what are the outcomes, what are we hearing from people who are adopting it. So, you know, from the learnings of the few to the learnings of the many, this is how we actually solve this problem.
Really neat. Wow. Last question about talk as we wind down our discussion is just how is pricing structured? What's the pricing model like?
Sure. We firmly believe in openness and saying no hidden costs. And you know, it's easy. You would say, of course, everybody would like no hidden costs. But the trick is that many IT and security solutions actually raise later needs and say professional services, say custom integrations, which turn out being costs. So for us, the basic model, if you come to think of it, is, hey, the more different types of events and processes you automated with me, with the product, not with me personally, of course, the more value we provided to you as an organization. an adequate licensing fee is what we earned in the process. Naturally, it cannot be pure consumption based as your monthly Amazon bill. So we deliver predictable, well-defined enterprise packages that are aiming at sort of like a certain level of adoption, certain amount of activity. Of course, they are elastic and very easily extendable if the needs change.
Okay. So it's a license-based code.
It's a SaaS. It's a service at the end of the day. And you license by the level of the service that suffices for your level of automation. And if you happen to cross whatever is needed, don't expect us to block you and say, no, you're not automating anymore. Expect us to have a very candid conversation about, hey, we're so happy we managed to bring you more value than you originally envisioned. Let's see how in the future we can true up and align your subscription level to the actual satisfaction and value you're seeing from the product.
All right, great. That sounds really interesting. So for our viewers, if you want to learn more about Torq, definitely check out the website. It's torq.io, Torq. Really crisp, short name. I love that. And I hope you're excited about all that you heard Leonid describe from Torq. So with that, we come to the end of the questions about Torq. And we've got a little bit more time. And I thought we could ask Leonid a couple questions to kind of get to know him a bit more. So here goes. So Leonid, what would your alternate career path have been if not for your job in tech?
Not an easy question. You know, if we have to imagine in my private life, in addition to my family, I am a huge wine enthusiast. Now, not only consuming wine, which I hope many of our audience can actually relate to. But no, I'm actually a big enthusiast of the wine industry, anywhere between wine growing, wine making, and so on, right? Maybe
growing as well. Okay.
Absolutely. Me being a high-tech person through and through, second generation, maybe I am subscribing to this romantic aspect of creating something unique off the land, whereas I'm very aware that agriculture is actually very difficult work and quite a difficult market to exist in. But I have this dream of maybe having my own vineyard or winery one day. I am not entirely sure whether I am the most capable and gifted person to make the best possible wine there. So maybe I might not be making the best wines, but hey, I guarantee that I'll know who does and how to find them. That I can guarantee.
Wow. Neat. I think we should continue this conversation after our call because I've got a couple of bottles here that I've just been getting into. So I want to, run them by you and see, which are the ones I should be trying and all of that. One hobby or interest that you picked up during the pandemic?
Wow, pandemic was a tough time. Worked a lot from home. I'd say Mario Kart. Like seriously, I know it sounds completely childish. All of us were indeed childish without being ashamed of it. Unlike now, when we are ashamed of it, but we're still childish. So I stopped doing any kind of computer gaming many years ago. And what happened during the pandemic is I got really into Mario Kart. Online competing. Apparently, I have a bad temper when it comes to losing in a competition. Discovery, so yeah, all that.
Neat. Yeah, that's a fun way to spend the time at home.
If you succeed, like if you lose, not much fun in that. But sometimes you win, right?
Yeah. What was the moment that you knew you were going to be a programmer?
Wow. So both of my parents are graduates of electronics and information science degrees. I think my first encounter with personal computers, rather than coming to my late father's work and seeing this huge IBM mainframe clone and scary, was when I was around 8. And my father started working in a scientific laboratory that used personal computers. He was more of the electronics and then multimedia person, but I started seeing him engage more and more with basic programming language back then. We're talking late 80s, early 90s. This thing completely blew my mind. I don't know if I decided back then, but I think the universe decided it for me back then that that's what I'm going to become.
Wow, really cool. Amazing. Back then he did so much. That's really cool.
It was fun.
So yeah, you being CTO, the next question, the best and the worst part about being CTO.
So the best part about being CTO is that unlike many other roles, it is a very open, creative, and subjective for your interpretation. Some people take it into more inbound roles where they create technologies, etc. Others make it a completely outbound role where they evangelize things and so on. I am able to balance on this, shall we put it, line into the business needs. So the best is that it is a very open for innovation, flexibility work. Maybe the worst thing is maybe two. There are two really bad things. All of them are rooted, by the way, at the same problem, that it is a very open and subject to interpretation. So one of it is that when you are talking to people, they don't entirely know because they have no way of what kind of a CTO are you. So sometimes they would assume that you're actually like an engineering head turned CTO. Sometimes they the other way around. They say, oh, this guy has absolutely nothing to do with the actual operationalization, et cetera, et cetera. So this assumption of, when you say that you are a technology analysts, right? People have a much better assumption on what you are and what you are not than when I say that I'm a CTO. And that's like 50% of the bad thing. The other 50% of the bad thing is also related to it. Not many things are actually completely outside of my domain, so the work never stops. It never becomes someone else's problem. Like, okay, I'm a marketing person. Hey, huge challenge, a lot of things to do. That's a product. Somebody will take care of that. I'll focus on my things. CTO, yeah, kind of like they're all mine things, and it is a bit consuming, for the better and for worse.
Yeah, but I think it's great that you seem like a person that, you worn multiple hats across your career, and seems like you could
Indeed
really
have a lot of scratches
build
on my forehead because of that, yes.
Yeah, the last question for you, Leonid. How do you keep track of, what's happening in the space and just, the news, the important stuff?
Wow, that is actually really tough, right? Because in a modern world, there are so many sources of information, albeit with varying level of credibility, noise versus actual interesting stuff, etc. And I did not manage to get my own list of curated services. Instead, I crowdsource it to a very close circle of friends and colleagues, right? Sort of like I rely on not many, like 10, 15 people to each and every one of them consuming information from various sources to pre-curate it. We have an internal Slack community where these things go up for discussion and so on. So I'm like a tier 2 consumer in this sense, but on a reality check level, I rarely end up completely missing out on something important that goes on, because these 10 to 15 people are good at what they do, and usually, rarely things get passed by them. So that's me, right? Using very private sources because they never manage to curate a list, maybe because of remember the CTO thing, sun never sets on my duties, and it's looking for cost-effective solutions here, guilty as charged.
That's a really cool hack, something I want to try. I want to start thinking of who are those 10 people I could create a Slack channel with.
Start with any 10 people and then retire the ones that are not contributing content. As simple as that. You zoom in on the right mixture.
Really cool hack there to end. Thanks so much, Leonid. It was a delight talking to you. I think definitely one of the conversations I really, really enjoyed in all of our interviews so far. So thank you so much for just all that you shared with us, and you really made talk look really interesting. And just talking to you as well was just great. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And
it's been a tremendous pleasure.
And to our viewers, definitely head over to talk.io to check out what they do. It's a really cool product. and head over to amazic.com to keep track of all that we do as well. We'll try to bring you another part 2 continuation of this in a few months' time. So definitely subscribe and stay tuned for all these conversations. With that, Leonard and myself are signing off. Thank you.
Thank you.